this case. So let's look at what we've learned. The very first key Epstein probe began in Palm Beach in 2005. That put public heat on Epstein in a new way. Trump's current commerce chief, Howard Lutnick, says that back then is when he cut all ties with Epstein, his one-time neighbor. So we'll return to that in a moment on this timeline. Now, others have asked why the DOJ didn't nail Epstein then. The brand new files actually show some prosecutors tried, and they had so much evidence on him that in 2007, prosecutors internally said they had the goods, that they had enough material, evidence, testimony on Epstein for an actual sex trafficking case of not one or two, but actually a dozen teenage girls. And they wrote, and this is new that we've learned this, a 56-page draft indictment. So back then, some inside government were ready to charge Epstein for that whole terrible alleged conspiracy. But here's what I want to show you tonight, and this is newly revealed. That was the draft indictment, but it was discarded. The Bush DOJ never allowed it to be filed, and that was the big case. Instead, the top prosecutor, later a notorious name, Trump official Alex Acosta, at the time, he let Epstein off the hook with that controversial secret deal. And that meant just 1 year in prison for the lesser count of soliciting prostitution. Acosta and others have argued that this was basically the case they had, that these things are complicated. Well, it's taken all this time, but I can report for you tonight that now the new Epstein files released from Friday shows that's false, that there was a whole written draft indictment of the bigger case, and they just discarded it. So, what happened? Some prosecutors had that case written up, ready to go. We've now seen it, but their bosses, this later Trump ally Acosta, or perhaps bosses in Washington, discarded it. Now, Epstein got out, and he continued his activities. The difference at this point in time is the public was actually on notice of at least his conviction of as a sex offender, even if it was, as I mentioned, lesser than the other potential case. And that gives us context, new in this timeline, of how Trump official Lutnick was secretly emailing Epstein at that time about visiting his island. This was while Lutnick's family was on a trip, 7 years after he claimed to have cut ties, or the mega donor and recent Trump employee, Elon Musk, emailing about visiting Epstein's island, asking what day/night will be the wildest party. Now that shows, at a minimum, attempted proactive socializing, desiring to go to the island for what Musk called wild partying. And that's by Trump allies who have obviously claimed otherwise. Now, Musk has responded to say that he did not actually go to the island. Lutnick not denying this again, although he has less credibility now that the emails are public. And 1 day after the planned visit that Lutnick emailed about, knew from these files, an Epstein associate passed along an email to Lutnick that said, quote, "Nice to see you." The files suggest that for many, Epstein operated business as usual until 2018. This Miami Herald expose put heat on the DOJ. It had the goods again, which hadn't all been used. The DOJ had let Epstein off the hook before, but then he was indicted now on these tougher sex trafficking charges. The DOJ, since then, I should mention, has only indicted one person related to what's been documented as this sprawling conspiracy. And so I'm going to get into this because we are learning new things. For the first time, the new Friday files show the DOJ was eyeing other suspects. It's a mob-style chart, and the feds made this of Epstein's inner circle. So let's take a look at this right now as part of our special report. I just can tell you, this is a rare view inside a normally secret federal probe. You almost never see this type of thing before, during, or after a case, and the federal laws protect that. What's different here, of course, is Congress changed the laws for this particular mess of Epstein and the secrecy. So we have questions stoked here about why the feds, under first Trump and then the Biden DOJ, did not apparently pursue and indict most of these men, or the others who knew or partook in what the government also calls a broad sex trafficking ring. Which is it? A giant sex trafficking ring with someone at the center and other men involved in crimes, knowing and otherwise? Or not? And if it's not, then what were the feds doing with their chart and their leads? I can tell you we have redactions here, some of which may be for potential victims or those that the government viewed as more coerced into being a part of these crimes rather than being the ringleader or the proactive criminal. And the feds tracking Epstein's lawyer, accountant, financial advisor, and a man later indicted in Europe for sex offenses who died in prison awaiting trial, as did Epstein in 2019. But there's a lot of questions here about these leads. Some of these individuals, I should mention, are still being subpoenaed by Democrats in Congress to try to get more information where apparently the DOJ stopped. Now, I mentioned the death in prison. The Trump DOJ stated that the videos that were key around where Epstein was in that cell, that the videos were lost. So I'm going to go all the way back here for round 2 of our timeline. Then Trump Attorney General Barr was defending the fact that videos were missing. The DOJ did go after one co-conspirator that now has become a bit of a household name, Maxwell, and she was convicted and sentenced here to 20 years. The public demands for transparency, the pressure on this case built over time. I think everybody knows that by now. And so Trump was eventually campaigning on declassification. We all lived through his attorney general saying she had a client list on her desk. Then Attorney General Bondi announced no client list, no more files, no more videos, no evidence of blackmail. This was where the Trump administration tried to stop all this. And this wasn't that long ago. They said there wouldn't be any other evidence to be disclosed. And that stoked outrage from victims, from experts, from members of Congress, as well as many people who were in Trump's MAGA base, who were promised very recently other things by Bondi and Trump himself. Then Trump did something very unusual. He sent his loyal attorney, now at the DOJ, for this unusual interview with Maxwell, as I've reminded you, the only other person charged for anything. And she was upgraded to a better prison facility. As for Musk, whose emails had not been exposed yet, well, he was claiming that Trump was in the files when they had their fallout. Again, the timeline is striking because we now know what Musk knew apparently, but no one else did in public, which is that he was asking to go down to the island by email. Musk, who understands technology, knew or had reason to know he was in the files. As for Lutnick, well, remember, he claimed he wasn't involved or in contact. That is undercut by the emails. And at this time, whether he realized the files were ever going to come out or not, he was working for an administration that now was backing secrecy. He then was talking, while in office, about Epstein being a blackmailer.
That's what his MO was, get a massage, get a massage. And what happened in that massage room, I assume, was on video. This guy was the greatest blackmailer ever. Blackmailed people. That's how he had money.
Not just a blackmailer, says Lutnick, but one of the greatest. That's like saying a greatest drug deal ever or greatest criminal conspirator ever. It means that Lutnick is saying this guy did this a lot, even though his fellow cabinet official, Bondi, was recently saying there was no blackmail and nothing else. And now the files suggest there was certainly a lot of people that there were leads for. So this is the tension inside the Trump administration with people that we're now learning were in the files, were emailing with Epstein, were discussing potentially visiting him while they talk about his blackmail operation. Then we get to recent history. Trump, of course, losing the battle to stop the Epstein law. It passed overwhelmingly. It required the DOJ to release the files. By the end of December, they started with basically under 1% and heavy redactions, which we'll see here. And then, over 40 days past due, and thus breaking the law, after those 13,000 files, you get this new batch of 3 million. And many of the files have incriminating material that we've highlighted here, which can make more sense in the broader timeline. DOJ says this is the final drop. Epstein's accusers, though, note that after all of this delay, some lying, these errors, Trump keeping officials in his cabinet who now have been caught lying about this and had some tie to Epstein while saying he's a blackmailer. After all of that, victims note that the DOJ still had redaction errors at a minimum, that they exposed some identities, at the very same time that they seemed so intent to go to great lengths to delay, deny, defy, or protect some people in the files.